Okay, more of a background
Yeah.
would be the fact that what is today known as Israel wasn't Israel. The entirety of the area, including the Gaza Strip, the West Bank, it was all Palestine. And that area, civilization-wise, is one of the places that experienced civilization. Yeah. We have the Roman era, the Byzantine era.
Even the Greeks, the Greeks
Greeks.
met with Egypt, and
Yeah.
the entire civilization kind of like merged to like create this beautiful thing.
Yeah. I mean, Egyptians had control at a point, the Mongolians at a point, and we have the Muslim having control over the area today, which is quite in contention. And as of that point, as we all know, from the biblical perspective, we have the Dome of the Rock, the place where Jesus was interred, and all those places were quite open for pilgrims to visit under the Muslim rulers during that particular era.
It's a very secret place.
Yeah.
For the Abrahamic religions, Judaism, Christianity, and Islam.
Yes, that's true.
After during the prior to the First Crusade, it belonged to the Christians, right? I should believe so anyway.
At a point,
I mean,
particularly Christians, the Romans.
The Romans, and the Romans tried to They
adopted Christianity under Constantine.
Yeah, before that, they tried to make Jerusalem less of Judaism and more of
Christianity. That was during Constantine's era, and that was because the wars he had fought to bring all the tribes together. He won them, and that was also as a result of the influence of his mother. So he declared Christianity as a major religion in the area, and that didn't mean that the other Abrahamic religion didn't have a role to play.
The Ottoman Empire took over afterwards, and they were there all the way up till the First World War, which is where I think we should start. So, where do you think, like from that perspective, kind of bringing us up to the previous century? How do you think everything started from that point?
From that point, everything started with, from the perspective of the Jews, their persecution abroad in Europe, and deciding that they needed a place to call their own after the Second World War. And in doing that, the Zionist movement, the modern Zionist movement, which was founded by Theodor Herzl, played a role. And we also have the Rothschild, Dorothy Dolly Rothschild. They also played significant roles in ensuring that what we now know as Israel came to be. But then before Israel came to be, there were various aliyahs into the current geographical area known as Israel. And it wasn't to the exclusion of the Arabs. The Arabs were still there. Because the area was quite huge. But then the land belonged to the Arabs who were there, just that they were not, population-wise, they weren't able to inhabit all of the areas. So when the Jews started coming back home, they met a lot of free land, and they did have discussions with some of the Arabians to like buy some of the lands. An example is Baron Edmond de Rothschild. He actually bought land from the Arabs.
If you had to give like a timeline for this, is this going to be around the 1950s or 1948? Because I want to draw us back a little bit into everything that accumulated in Europe and in the Persian Gulf, the Arabian lands, before that part where the Israelites came to settle in Israel. So your timeline now, the Rothschild thing, is it getting the 50s or the 40s?
The 40s. The 40s, because Israel was established 1948. So that's like the 40s, the Zionist movement.
All right. So 40s. What I wanted to draw here is that if you were to arrive at a point in time where everything began snowballing into creation of the the Israel state, you would go back to the First World War, 1914 to 1919. Yeah, and then you will come to find that in a bid to destabilize the Ottoman Empire, right? Because the Ottoman Empire aligned with Germany and Austria-Hungary during the First World War, right? So in a bid to decapitate or handicap the Ottoman efforts in the First World War, Britain made some deals.
Yes, they did.
With the Arabians.
Yes.
The Arabians also, they didn't see themselves coexisting with the Turks.
Yes.
Yeah.
And that was because as of that time, the Ottoman Empire had become the sick man of Europe. The Ottomans...
It was also like slowly dying.
Yes, they didn't have as much control as they did in previous centuries and periods. Yeah.
Okay, that makes sense. So anyway, the Britain saw this opportunity and took it. And it began making deals with the Arabs and simultaneously was making deals with the Jews.
It was more of getting the Arabs to help them fight during the major war.
Yeah, creating uprising within the Ottoman Empire destabilized its war efforts greatly, and eventually they were kicked out of the First World War. Right. So making double deals with the Arabs, with the Jews, promising them territories on the same land, kind of already created some tension within between these two. And then if you go back to the Second World War, 1939 to 1945, right? The Holocaust that happened with the Jews, and Jews were also persecuted under Joseph Stalin in Russia and the USSR, Russia. So the Jews didn't feel so safe.
Yeah.
Right? They were persecuted in Poland, Germany, Russia, other parts of Europe like that. Yeah. This wasn't going to be the first time that they've been persecuted, but it was worse this time because the entire world was aware of the brutality against this race of people, right? So then it was decided that, you know what, I think now is a good time for us to move back to the Holy Land, move back to our land, move back to our territory. And that's when the rift between the Arabs, the Palestinians, and the Israelites became so intense that it began accumulated into war. The Israel gained their independence in 1947. Then after that was a war with Jordan, Syria, and a whole bunch of other wars. Do you want to explain that?
Okay. A bit of background is the fact that we had the Balfour Declaration, which sort of established the area that we now know as Israel. Mm-hmm. So after the Balfour Declaration and the end of the Second World War, either the First or Second World War, the area at that time was known as Palestine. It was given to British as a mandated territory under the auspices of the United Nations. Yeah. And in doing that, the Britain had control over the area, and as such, they tried to stem the flow and the tide of Jews going back to Israel. And in establishing the homeland of the Israelites, Madagascar was actually considered.
Yeah, well, that didn't work out.
Yeah, that didn't work out. I mean, like, biblical wise and all of that. So it just had to be that place. But then in going back there, they also realized that there were people who stayed there, Palestinians. Yeah. And I just think that in establishing a sort of cohesive society amongst the two groups of people and the two religions, or the three Abrahamic religion, it just didn't work out, because in times past, the three Abrahamic religions, they've coexisted within the same geographical area, although there was always some form of persecution on the Jews or the Roma or the Christians.
I think that even continued upon, even following the independence, after the Israelites gained independence in 1947, following that, right, there had been discrimination and persecution on both sides.
Yeah,
Palestine, and although it was minor, it was
it was minor.
But the fact is that after I think there were about 3 or 4 wars where the Arabians, they rallied against the Israelites.
Yeah,
but the Israelites won, and after each victory, they would take more land.
Yes,
right. I think at a point Jordan annexed West Bank.
Yes, they did. But then another war broke out, and then Israel
the tension keeps rising.
Yeah, the tension keeps rising.
That domino effect keeps happening. One thing leads to another.
Yeah.
And you can only see the same thing about the First World War. It wasn't the assassination of Archduke Franz Ferdinand.
Yes.
It was just a spark.
Yes.
It makes up about 20% or less of the reason the First World War broke out. Go back to the tension that was already like building up between Germany and Britain. They involved in some kind of arms race.
Yeah.
Right. Germany was trying to build more battleships like Dreadnought SS. And Europe. Britain was the Lord of the Sea.
Yeah.
Had the Royal Navy. So the tension was already building up, and there was sort of like already alliances building, and also the fact that Germany had previously defeated Denmark and Austria in a war before it reunified in 1871. Right, so like tension was already building up, and if you have to go back again, you go back to like the Napoleonic eras. Exactly. Yeah. So it just you keep going back. You keep taking steps back, and you can say the same thing about the Palestinian issue here, and you can go back to the first century before Jesus was a thing, before like most of these regions were a thing, right? So it's difficult for us to, because here's the thing. If we have to tell the stories, we will tell the stories differently from each person's perspective.
Yes.
And in the past, they're like, oh, we accepted these people to come and be on our lands, and now they're taking our lands, persecuting us. They confined us to this place, this Gaza Strip that's just like a prison.
And the West Bank.
The West Bank, and they have supplies to our house, our water,
electricity, water, well.
Exactly. So if you have to tell this story from the Palestinian perspective, you will have some things to tell.
Yeah.
And then if you were to do the same with the Israelites, you say the same thing.
Yeah.
But now, the way we tell our stories is very different.